When I first met Fritz, I was 10 years old, but didn't know who Fritz was. My father had a service station next to the ale house bar. And one Saturday morning, as a little boy, I went with my dad to work with them, quote unquote, work with them at the service station. And as we were opening up the service station, I was tasked with the chores of putting like the window squeegee buckets out and opening the oil rack and things like that. And all of a sudden I hear my dad yelling. He had some famous lines like, "What the hammerheads, Jiminy Crickets, freaking Fritz." And I said, "Dad, what's the matter?" And he said, "Friggin' Fritz tore all the flags down from the gas station and he's over there in the park sleeping with them." And I had no idea who Fritz was. But as a little boy, I remember that story, and life went on. And then fast forward, around 2008, I had sold the company and took a job with a large transportation company. And one day I was working a little bit late, and this guy, Fritz, comes back from a trip. And he says, "What are you still doing here?" I said, "I don't know," and something to the effect of, the work ethic that I learned from my dad back on Hamilton Street or something like that. And Fritz looked at me square in the eye and said, "You're Reds' kid, aren't you?" And he said, "I knew your father, and don't get out of your seat, I want to show you something." He went outside to his car and he brought in a manuscript. It was not a book yet, but it was a manuscript of a book he was writing called Adventure on a Dare. And he turned to a page in the book and he said, "Read this subchapter," and it was called Reds Comes Through. And the subchapter in the book was the story about him tearing the flags down and using them for blankets in the park to stay warm. And the Reds Comes Through part was, which I was not aware until that night, that even though my father was yelling and angry with Fritz for tearing his plastic flags down, later my dad put a car in the alley between the gas station and the ale house and a moving blanket and said, "Fritz, if you ever need somewhere to sleep and stay warm, use the blanket and the car." And that was the Reds Comes Through chapter, which is in the book today. But really from that time on, at that night in the office when he showed me the subchapter, I kind of started taking an interest in who is this guy and what's he all about. And one of the things that makes me just a little bit sad when I think about it is here we are 50-something years later, and really his story is now just being understood and shared like I kind of wish it would have been 30 or 40 years ago.